Hey Kieran,
G'day.
are you able to introduce yourself to our viewers, please?
Rightio, kia ora. G'day, I'm Kieran McAnulty. I'm the Labour Party candidate in the Wairarapa electorate.
Excellent. So, I'm going to put some questions to you, mate.
All right.
So, you obviously contested the electorate 3 years ago, 2014, but lost to Mr. Scott of National. So, this time around, what are you doing differently?
Well, there's a couple of points there, I suppose. One, the party is performing differently. So in 2014, Labour polled 25% nationally and 20% here in Wairarapa. And that's consistent with previous elections where Labour has traditionally polled around 5 percentage points lower than what the party receives across the country. And so it's always going to be very difficult to win a seat of this nature when the party is polling 25%. However, things have changed. So now the average of polls has National and Labour head-to-head. In fact, Labour is polling at the same rate as what we were when we last won this electorate. So that's a tremendous base on which to campaign on. And actually, on top of that, people know me now. I spent a lot of my effort introducing myself 3 years ago, whereas now they tend to know me. They're much more interested in hearing what I've got to say. And I think in the last 3 years, I've demonstrated my commitment to the electorate. So people are taking me a lot more seriously this time.
Excellent. What is it that you need to do as a Labour candidate to appeal to the really solid, almost kind of team National voters, like ones who will traditionally vote National, such as farmers, business owners, those people in the Wairarapa that who have voted National for years? What do you have to do as a Labour candidate to sort of swing them over, I guess would be the word?
Well, given the feedback I've had from a number of National Party supporters, but also Green Party supporters and New Zealand First supporters, is that they share with me a real commitment to this place and a desire to see it thrive. And so MMP gives those voters that have not yet anyway, been persuaded to support Labour an option to use their party vote to support the government that they would like to see and use their local vote to have the person that they think best represents this region. And in fact, having an effective, engaged, visible MP is good for this region regardless of what party they're from or what position they may hold in Parliament. And I would argue an effective MP is much better for this region, even if they're in opposition, as opposed to an ineffective MP that's part of the governing party. However, having said that, voters have an opportunity now to get the change that they want, the change in government, and also have an MP that is part of the party that is forming that government. So 2 ticks Labour is our message throughout this electorate.
Yes. So, I guess, what is it that Labour can do for farmers, for example, that National can't? What do you think that you could, for the rural sector, what can Labour do?
Well, actually, we've got quite a comprehensive policy around the rural sector, not just in primary industries, but also rural affairs and biosecurity. 9 years ago, when this government was first elected, they combined biosecurity, rural affairs and primary industries into one ministry, the Ministry of Primary Industries. We say that that was a backward step because what it doesn't recognise is the distinct importance of biosecurity and rural affairs. So Labour would reinstate a Minister of Rural Affairs, and in doing so, what that recognises is that communities and towns like Masterton, Carterton, Greytown, Featherston and Martinborough, but also the towns right up the electorate like Dannevirke and Waipukuro, they are linked to primary industries very closely. However, they have distinct issues that affect them that have nothing to do with agriculture. And so the issues around health, education, infrastructure, they are important and they need to be seen through a rural lens. So what Labour is proposing is a policy of rural proofing, that every legislation that is proposed and put forward by a Labour government, one core question needs to be asked: how will this benefit rural communities?
Yep.
And by going through that lens, we're ensuring that electorates like Wairarapa will actually no longer be overlooked by successive governments. So I don't accept that farmers are National and townies are Labour. It's not true. In fact, in our primary industries policy, we're indicating a desire to look long-term for our primary industries. How can we transition from a volume, commodity-based production to a higher end, high value production. We cannot any longer rest on our laurels with the mentality that producing more is better. What we need to do is produce the best. And the Labor government is keen to work through that vision with primary industries by establishing a primary industries council, which will advise future governments, and so that we can actually move along this path together rather than simply just being satisfied with the status quo.
Cool. So, when I spoke to Mr. Scott on Tuesday, he sort of insisted that taxes that Labor may or may not propose on the rural sector, such as water levies, flatulence tax, carbon tax, capital gains, that sort of thing, will have a disastrous effect on the rural sector, and that would trickle down to affect the city folk.
I've heard that a lot.
You've heard that a lot?
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that, and how does it sort of tie in with the townies, I guess?
Oh, look, I reject this, what is essentially scaremongering. I mean, we heard various times throughout the campaign that Labor wants to ruin primary industries. Labor wants to ruin rural communities. I mean, come on, let's just be rational about this. Labor Party have been in government 5 times, and throughout that time, whenever we've been in government, we've actually shown leadership with the primary industries. We established Fonterra, for example. That was forward-thinking, long-term approach to the dairy industry in this country. And what we're proposing is that we cannot continue with what we're doing at the moment, where we have a situation where our rivers are in a state that they never used to be, in a state that actually undermines our clean green brand. And it is that brand that we trade off. Is that if you go overseas and you look at New Zealand products, they are seen as good quality products produced at high standards. And that's true. But the more we continue to undermine that brand, the less chance that we can continue to be seen as a clean green producer. And we cannot underestimate the value of that brand to our products. In fact, it's that commands the value that we can extract from our primary industries. But it is under threat. Just 2 weeks ago, we had Al Jazeera, a worldwide journalist broadcasting network, doing a documentary on the state of our rivers. This is on the back of a few years ago, John Key, the former Prime Minister, really struggling to defend the 100% pure brand that our Tourism New Zealand uses because of the state of our environment. More and more consumers overseas are becoming aware of the situation in our environment, and we simply cannot take that risk any longer. So all we're proposing is measures that will look at how we can forge a high value production in the future. Now, anything that we've proposed will be along with consultation with those affected industries. So we are signalling that we are going to include a levy on the commercial use of water. And so those farmers that irrigate, we are signalling to them that we will be looking to impose a fair price on that use of irrigation. Farmers that don't irrigate will not face that levy. Likewise, we're proposing that commercial bottling of fresh water, there should be a charge to that. And we will look at 10 cents per litre on that. But what we're proposing is an amount that is fair in irrigation that is probably up to 2 cents per 1,000 litres. But the price is yet to be set, and it won't be set until we consult with primary industries, because there is a lot of factors that need to be taken into consideration. Different regional factors, different uses of water, the way that different industries use that water. That's a conversation we need to have. And it's only right that we do that in government when we have the resources available to us through Treasury and other ministries as well. So, despite their best efforts of scaremongering, I don't actually think people are buying it. Nobody is seriously believing that any government that formed by Labor would want to destroy anything. In the past Labor government, we ran 9 surpluses in a row. We had the longest sustained period of economic growth since World War II. Our economic credentials stack up. In fact, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, have identified that it was the situation that the last Labor government left this current national government that enabled them to go through the global financial crisis in the manner that they did. So no, I don't believe that people actually fall for this hyperbole that's being released by the current MP. And actually, he has had to back down, as have many opponents, to what we're proposing. You know, we used to hear of $18 cabbages, we used to hear of $75 bottles of wine, but Irrigation New Zealand have come out and said that what we're proposing at the maximum level will not have any material effect on food prices at all. So I think that what we need is an actual rational discussion around where we're moving our primary industries into the future, and that's all we're proposing.
Absolutely. As far as the irrigation tax on irrigation goes, what does the party hope to get out of that tax? Where is the extra money going to go towards?
Well, at the moment, there's a fund for cleaning up the rivers, $100 million, that is being paid for by all tax users, all taxpayers, regardless of whether they are commercial users of water or not. And so what we hope to achieve from this policy, once it's implemented after consultation, is to fund that same amount, but from those who use the water on a commercial basis. And so that money will be available to regional councils who can then use that to implement strategies and mechanisms so that we can once again have swimmable rivers. And it's only when we can have that situation that we can actually live up to the 100% pure brand that we portray to the world.
If you were to be elected representative here in Wairarapa, what would you do to help ensure that our rivers are cleaned up?
Well, it's pretty essential that we have adequate funding here, you know, particularly in small, relatively smaller rural areas like Wairarapa that don't have the large population base to fund into local initiatives run by either local councils or even regional councils. But it's important that an MP advocates for its region. So there is the possibility of funding from the Wellington Regional Council, who on the whole I believe are doing a pretty good job. But it's essential that the local MP understands the issues here and advocates strongly for them, but also shows some leadership. If I was elected as the local MP, then there would be some people who have followed what the current government is saying and would have some concerns around the policy. The whole point of this policy is about consultation, and I would take a leading role in that if elected as the MP for Wairarapa as part of a Labour-led government, because it's important that everybody is brought along on this. Everybody buys into what we're trying to achieve for primary industries and rural communities.
Yeah, absolutely. What could also be done by the Labour government to help protect aquatic life here in Wairarapa, such a species such as our shortfin eel? We have 5 species of whitebait which are set to go endangered because of
That's right.
no limits on catch. What are some things that the Labour government could propose? A Labour government could propose.
That's part of the standards that we're proposing as part of our wider freshwater policy. So we would measure the standard of water across many different measures, and some of those are aquatic life. And so it's important that we ensure that the rivers actually are abundant in life. If they are swimmable, if they're suitable for swimming, then you can guarantee that that's going to be achieved, because you can't do these things half pie. We've said that we want to bring our rivers back to a swimmable standard within a generation. It is achievable. If we want to do what we hope to achieve for rural communities, that is essential. It's a core part of it. But I come back to the key point, is that this will be done after consultation. It's important that everybody understands what our vision is for rural communities, but in particular primary industries and the sake of our rivers.
Excellent. As you know, the Wairarapa has a particularly high rate of suicides, highest per head of population at present. In 2016-17, 606 New Zealanders have taken their own lives. If you were to be elected MP for this region, I guess what would you wish to do in order to help decrease these rates of suicide?
Well, look, most people, I think, probably all, have been affected by someone close to them taking their life. And it's certainly something that's very dear to me. Family members have been affected by mental illness, and it hurts. And I know, being involved in the volunteer fire brigade, when we get called out to suicide calls, how awful that is, and how much of an impact it has on us, let alone the close ones, the family ones and loved ones of those that have committed suicide. The thing is that every suicide is preventable, and what we need to ensure is that there is support systems in place. What I would advocate strongly for as the MP here is that we take mental health and suicide prevention out of the political cauldron and try to get some bipartisan agreement on what is needed, what works, and actually commit to it. So it doesn't matter who changes, whether the government changes or not in 9, 18, 21 years, whatever, that we know that people in our community, through no fault of their own, are suffering from mental illness, that they will get the support they need. It is of real concern in our community that people here are not getting the support that they need, that there is a waiting list to get that support, that there is not enough support in terms of addiction services as well, which is linked to some extent. Excuse me.
You're right.
That's what I would advocate for strongly. But also, I'm proud to stand for a party that takes this seriously, that would fund it properly. It shouldn't come down to penny pinching, that this is a priority for everyone in this electorate, because and the country, in fact, because we all know someone that could have been prevented, but sadly felt that they had no option but to take their life. And I would see that as a priority for me if I was representing Wairarapa.
Would you say the DHB needs to Wairarapa DHB needs to have an increase in funding in order to?
Oh, no question. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way that they categorise DHBs in terms of their financial performance is just like a traffic light: red, orange, and green. Green, you're going okay. Orange, there's a few warnings, and red, it's a really difficult, tough situation for them. They simply do not have enough money. And Wairarapa DHB is in that category. And there's actually two other DHBs in this electorate as well, with Mid-Central and Hawke's Bay. But if we're just looking at Wairarapa DHB as per the question, what is clear is that this DHB is simply not getting enough funding. And this is prevalent across many rural areas, that the current structure does not serve rural DHBs or rural communities within a DHB area well. There's simply not enough commitment from this government. In fact, we hear, and quite possibly when you were speaking to the national candidate, you probably did hear yourself, they say that there's never been this many surgeries or there's never been this much money put into health. And technically that's true, but it's very easy when you've inherited an amount spent on health that's the highest ever. It doesn't matter what you increase it by. If you increase it by $1, it's still going to be the highest ever. The point is that it's not keeping up with requirements. So over the last 9 years, the national government has underfunded health across the country by at least $2.3 billion. So what they've put into healthcare has not kept up with rising population, the changing demographics of the population, so it is getting older, which presents challenges, and also the rising cost of healthcare, so inflation. There's no point trumpeting that we've never seen so much money in health if it's simply inadequate. So what we have proposed is that we will increase health spending by $8 billion on top of what the government has committed. And what I would do strongly if I were elected as the MP for Wairarapa is advocate for the services that are needed here, so that our maternity services here are up to scratch, so that what this community needs can be done here within reason, so that where we can reduce the requirement to go out of Wairarapa to get what we need. There'll always be a need for that. Some services will always only be available in the larger urban centres like Wellington, but on the whole, having a hospital here is a great asset to the community, but we are hamstrung when it is not meeting the services. And the DHB and its staff do a wonderful job with what they've got, but they are running deficits because they are under pressure. And what we need to do immediately is make sure that they have enough funds so that they can serve this community as they have committed to do.
Sure, and the extra money Labor proposes, you are hopeful that will go towards mental health and suicide prevention?
We've made specific commitments around mental health. I'm sure you saw the footage of how emotionally affected Jacinda Ardern was when she met those people
Yes.
that put shoes out on the lawn in front of Parliament. It's a really powerful image, and we've all got a story of someone that we're connected to. We have made a direct commitment to ensuring that the needs of mental health are met, and that will come as part of that $8 billion commitment.
There has been talk I think it was the Green Party in particular, to launch a strategy which would see suicides reduced to zero in New Zealand by a certain date. If you would you commit to that?
Oh, look, when something's preventable like suicide, I don't think we should be satisfied when anything that's preventable occurs. Just like workplace safety, you know, a lot of those deaths are preventable. So let's actually strive and identify what we can do to avoid them. And I think that's a marvellous aspiration to look for. You know, that anything less is a terrible message to the community that we are satisfied that people are killing themselves. I'm not, and I would certainly support any measure, if it was looking to be effective, that would aim to have a zero suicide rate in this country.
Kieran, if you were to be elected Wairarapa MP, what would you do to support those in this community that are basically living on a low wage? Traditionally, Wairarapa has been a low-wage economy. What would you do to support these people and ensure that the gap between our lowest income earners and our highest reduces?
Well, there's a lot that can be done, and in fact, we're getting a lot of support from business owners here in Wairarapa because they identify that their turnover as a business owner is directly proportional to people's capacity to spend. So if people are struggling with the income that they've got and they don't have any discretionary income, then that hurts businesses. And regions like Wairarapa, which have a much higher number of small to medium-sized businesses that are dependent on particularly retail, but not necessarily, dependent on people's ability to spend, then a low-wage economy affects them just as much as anybody else. And so there's a lot that we can do. We can ensure that people are getting paid enough to contribute to society. What we can also do here in Wairarapa is ensure that our tenants of Trust House social housing or community housing are no longer discriminated against. As it stands, existing tenants of Trust House houses do not qualify for income-related rents. Yet if somebody moves into this region and goes into a Trust House house, then they do qualify. It's utter discrimination and it's penny pinching. And the community have stood together alongside Trust House and asked repeatedly for this government to no longer allow this to occur, and they have ignored them. And it's not good enough, because we have people in our community who are spending almost all of their income on rent, despite the fact that those rents for those houses are still below market rents. They are not qualifying for the assistance that other tenants in other regions are. And that's one thing that a Labor government can do to change that. I'd be strongly advocating for that as one measure to do it. But it's also around ensuring that there are fair pay agreements in place so that people are getting paid what they're worth. And we only need to look at the aged care sector to see how this government values a fair wage for a fair day's work. They are trumpeting the fact that aged care workers are now getting a fair wage, but they went through the courts kicking and screaming and dragging their heels right throughout. They did not want to do it, they were forced to do it, and now they have the gall to say that it is one of their achievements in government. I just can't believe it. You know, we need a government that actually commits to ensuring that people get a fair wage, and that so that rural communities like this actually thrive because they've got money to contribute to society as a whole.
Oh, sorry, Kieran, just explain the sort of discrimination in renting again. So if you're a social housing tenant,
Well, we have no New Zealand housing presence in Wairarapa.
No.
So the national government sold those houses to what was then the Mastered and Licensing Trust, now known as Trust House. And so Trust House operates community housing right throughout Wairarapa, from Dannyvirk south to Featherston. And in many ways we're fortunate, because they could have gone to a private developer and they would be private rentals now at market rates. But where we're missing out now is that those tenants of Trust House, despite them being an accredited social housing provider, and all that means is that tenants of Trust House can qualify for their income related rent, but they have deliberately excluded existing tenants. And some of the tenants have lived here their whole lives and stayed in those what were state houses are now community houses owned by Trust House, and yet they are missing out, whereas new tenants get them. It's wrong, it's not fair, and it's impacting on our community, because these people, these tenants, through no fault of their own, are spending a far higher proportion of their income just to pay the rent, way higher than anybody else. And so that's outside the region that qualifies for this. and it's putting an unfair burden on them. It's preventing those tenants from contributing to society by spending money because they simply cannot spend it because it's going into rent. A below market rent, but still very high as a proportion of their salary. What the government needs to do is actually highlight that this isn't fair, that this does hurt Wairarapa almost exclusively. There might be other examples, but certainly it hits Wairarapa, and needs to step up and say that's not right. If new tenants get it, then existing tenants should get it. It will release the burden that they face, and it also means that they can spend a lot more money in town and support our local economy.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd heard anecdotally Trust House to raise the rents on its properties. Is this correct?
Oh, I'm not aware of that. There has been rent increases. I know that, but I do also know that the current rates are below market rents. So if you are in a Trust House, then you are paying less than what the market would dictate. That's important, and I think that's a principle of Trust House. But what we do need is to bring in those income-related rent subsidies so that they are paying what is fair, not what is just below market rates. And Trust House wants this as well. They are pushing very hard for the income-related rent subsidy to come onto their tenants, but the government has ignored them. Speaking
of rents, we currently have an issue in the Wairarapa where renters are being faced with a lack of stock, basically. With the current housing boom, there's been people buying up on houses, landlords selling the properties, and that is forcing renters out because there is less stock available. What would a Labour government do to change that here in the Wairarapa, and what would you do as if you were to be elected MP to advocate for those people?
Well, I think there needs to be a conversation had around what presence can Housing New Zealand have in this community. Can it work alongside Trust House? But also, how can we support the construction industry so that we can build more houses here? We hear a lot about there being never any more apprentices, or that the building boom is going great guns. And in many respects it is. But also what we're seeing is that there's no planning going around how we can increase our skill set at the moment. So Labour has committed to building 100,000 homes over 10 years. Obviously, I would advocate strongly for some of those being in the high pressure areas of Wairarapa. But also I would strongly advocate that we shouldn't just look at some arbitrary figure that MSD have registered of people that are in need of social housing, because it is not a true reflection of the need in our community. We strongly need emergency housing because there are homeless in Wairarapa. And I tell you what, I've lived here my whole life, and this is the first that I have seen of this scale, the need for housing. There has to be leadership shown by our MP and the government to look at any way possible that we can increase the housing stock in this electorate. But also, how can we help people to get into the construction trade? So one of our policies that's very popular amongst tradesmen and tradespeople in the building industry is our apprenticeship policy, that we say to tradespeople, do you want to take on an apprentice? More often than not, the answer is yes. But then we ask, will you? And they're not sure, because there is a risk presented by taking on an apprentice. If things are going well now, there's no guarantee that it's going to be the case in 3 years' time over the term of an apprenticeship. So it is a risk to take on an apprentice at this stage. What we've said to them is if they take on someone that's currently looking for work, that the Labour government will pay the tradesperson a subsidy equivalent to the unemployment benefit over the 3-year term of that apprenticeship. So actually, it's not costing the country anymore, because if somebody is on the unemployment benefit now, there is a high likelihood that they will likely be on in 3 of the next 5 years or so. So if we're going to be putting that money into an unemployment benefit, let's put it into subsidising the cost of an apprenticeship. It helps out the tradesperson because it takes away their risk. It also helps the community because the workforce that are approaching retirement, there's a lot of skill set there that is essential that we could learn from before they retire. But we also need to plan about getting the skills we need as a community coming below them as well. But it also gives that young person a chance and gets them a trade. And I've spoken to tradespeople in this community that actually got their chance in the trades with a very similar policy about 30 odd years ago. If it worked then, it can work now, and every single tradesperson I've spoken to has said that's a good way that the government can play a small role in encouraging economic growth and planning for the future.
Excellent. I mean, what apprenticeships would you like to see return to the Wairarapa? I mean, obviously there's the construction area, but there are many other ways in which our young people can be employed.
Oh, absolutely, and it's not just apprenticeships either. There's there's many opportunities outside of trades that just have apprentices. You know, what I want to do is advocate and implement Labor's regional development policy, which I think is a core, fundamental policy that's going to make a big difference to this region. So what we've identified is that the current government is not doing enough for regions like Wairarapa in terms of regional development. So we do not have a regional development plan because we are part of the Wellington region, technically. And so because Wellington City is going gangbusters, we miss out. Whereas if the government identified that Wairarapa was a distinctly different economic region here, that we have distinctly different needs, but also we also have potential here for economic growth, then we would have a clear partnership with government. So I would advocate strongly for that. But I would also like to see policies like our Regional Development Fund, which identifies that small councils like Tararua or Central Hawke's Bay or South Wairarapa, indeed Carterton and Masterton as well, that have a relatively smaller population base and therefore a smaller rater base. And so the capacity for these councils to invest in core infrastructure so that they can be enabled for growth is much lower than it would be in higher population areas. So Labor acknowledges that and will partner with districts to put forward infrastructure so that they then can attract growth. We've also said that there's the potential for attracting business outside of the larger urban centres. So currently, if you're an employee, it might be an IT, an employer, yep, and your employees are struggling, despite being on good wages, to buy houses, etc. If you move to Wairarapa or regions like this, then a future Labor government will assist with your moving costs, because we acknowledge that if Auckland, for example, loses an employer of, say, 20 employees, it's not actually going to make a material difference, but it will make a fundamental difference if that employment was here in Wairarapa.
So sort of, about sort of moving, could we move industries to Wairarapa in particular?
Oh, absolutely, but we've got to make sure that the infrastructure is up to date.
Yes.
You know, Labor is the only party that highlights the need and earmarks it as a priority for investment into the Wairarapa rail line. At the moment, the Wairarapa rail line does not have anywhere near the investment that it needs, nor is it fulfilling the need of the community. So if we had more regular services and could cope with higher capacity in the commuter lines but also in off-peak, then we have a real economic opportunity here. We'd be able to attract more tourists, we'd be able to attract more businesses because they have a clear link to the capital city. But at the moment, if our businesses want to go to Wellington for a meeting, they have to drive because the train timetables do not suit the needs of business. They also do not suit the needs of tourists. So at the moment we're faced with the 83% of our tourists come domestically, a lot of them from Wellington. If they want to come over on the train, they're faced with a 7 o'clock start and a very late return. That's going to put a lot of people off, or it means that they will drive. But we want a user-friendly experience. We want the government to identify this as a need and invest in it, and I'm so pleased that that is highlighted as a priority in our manifesto. And it's just like the Manawatu Gorge. At the moment, our party is the only one with an ironclad commitment in our manifesto to fund an alternative to the Manawatu Gorge and a commitment that that will go through Woodville. Because that is hurting Woodville, but it is also hurting the wider Tararua district and Wairarapa as well. Because if you speak to tourist operators along our valley, a lot of the people travelling from north to go to Wellington, when they get to Manawatu, they're faced with a choice. They can go down the highway at State Highway 1, or they can go through what was the gorge and come down State Highway 2. Without a user-friendly option, they will go down State Highway 1. That means Tui Brewery, Pukaha, and every single town down our valley misses out on that tourist dollar. It's even hitting all the way down to Martinborough as well, because it's not just those going south, it's those going north. And so that's why that is a crucial piece of infrastructure for this region, and that's the role that government can play in ensuring that a rural area like Wairarapa is in a position to capitalise on its potential for economic growth.
Sure, yeah. Did you make a submission to the Local Government Commission about amalgamation of Wairarapa councils, and what are your thoughts?
I didn't this time, but I did last time. So last time there was a proposal around it being either a super city or a unitary authority. I proposed that the best option was actually to amalgamate the 3 district councils and keep the Wellington Regional Council. So given that that is what's being proposed now, then I'm very much in favour of that. Now, my day job is Economic Development Manager at the Masterton District Council, so whenever I'm asked about the amalgamation question, I declare that, because some people might see it as a conflict. But actually, if there is amalgamation, I may well find myself out of a job. If indeed I still have that job, who knows, I might be elected. We'll have to wait and see.
Yep.
But if I did have that job, I may well find myself out of it. So that's actually got nothing to do with it. But what we have here is an opportunity to have one unified voice for Wairarapa, advocating for a region with a collective identity. I opposed the super city because we would have lost our identity as Wellington, as Wairarapa, as part of Wellington, I should say. But I opposed the unitary authority because we would have lost our connection to Wellington and the benefits of the Wellington Regional Council. This is the perfect compromise, because actually, don't look at Auckland as an example of why we shouldn't do it. We should look at South Wairarapa as an example of why we should. So South Wairarapa used to be many different councils, of course. There's 3 different distinct towns, different communities within that council. They amalgamated, and each of those towns, Martinborough, Featherston and Greytown, have a community board under one local district council. And I guarantee you wouldn't find many people who would want to go back to the status quo. So actually all this proposal is proposing is that we bring the South Wairarapa model across the whole valley. So we have community boards in each distinct district, but we have one council making decisions that are efficient across the board, that there is consistency, and we have one mayor with a unified voice for Wairarapa, pushing hard for what we need. And if I was elected as the Member of Parliament for Wairarapa, I would work very closely with that mayor to strive for what the needs are here in this district. And there's only one other point that I want to make, and that is around the voice of community. And I'm satisfied that what is proposed will ensure that there is still local community voice held in this region. We all identify as Wairarapa. We're not going to lose out. We will still keep Masterton, Carterton, Greytown, Featherston and Martinborough will each have its own identity, but we can move ahead as one. And I think in 50 years' time this will be what it's like, and so I don't see any reason to hold back now. But the final point is that it actually doesn't matter what I think. I signed the petition. Even though I'm in favour of amalgamation, I signed the petition so that we could have a poll. What matters is what people here think. And so I won't be trying to say vote for me because I support amalgamation. I don't know what other candidates are saying. That's my personal view. That's how I will vote in the poll, because I think it is the right way forward for our region.
Awesome. Just another question on infrastructure. Like, how would Labor sort of plan on funding, like the funding for better rail link, funding for better roading, funding for a better alternative to the Manawatu Gorge? Like, how can we ensure that there's funds to do this?
Well, it's about priority. What we say is that we would rather invest in our communities, use the government resources and revenue so that we can give regions like Wairarapa what they deserve. If you compare the Wairarapa rail line to that in Kapiti on the other side of the ranges, they just simply do not compare. They're worlds apart. One is electrified all the way to Waikanae, the other has still got 50-year-old sleepers or whatever underneath our line. It's amazing how much neglect there has been by successive governments, in fairness, but that has to be prioritised. And what we've said is that we would rather put money into regional development than the proposed tax cuts, which see 400 million going to the top 10% who simply do not need it. Jacinda Ardern and the Labour MPs have said quite clearly they do not need this $20 a week. What we need is to invest in health, invest in education, and invest in infrastructure here in the regions. We're also proposing that the money available to regional roads will double. So instead of the 140 odd million available now, we've proposed up to 280 million available for rural roads, so that we can finally, with a strong MP, get what we need in this region, around about at the Ngāmataua Road and Norfolk Road intersections, for example, or finally a passing lane in the road between Masterton and Woodville. These are the things that the community have been screaming out for, but we haven't had a strong advocate in our MP. And that needs to change. And that's the feeling that I've had right out in the streets consistently throughout this election, that people want to see a change of MP. And on current polling, they have that opportunity, that really this is a two-horse race. There's only two candidates that can win this seat. There's the incumbent and there's myself. And I think that message is loud and clear now. People are coming forward. They're either saying we're going to tick 2 ticks Labour, or they're going to vote for another party, but give me their local vote, because they want to see a change of MP here in Wairarapa.
And I guess, and to evaluate yourself, Kieran, why would you say you are that person? Why is Kieran that person?
Well, statistically, that I'm in that spot. So the Labour Party is polling on the poll of polls at the same rate as the last time we had a Labour MP elected in Wairarapa. So it's clear on the stats that I'm on the verge. But also, I've demonstrated quite clearly my commitment to this place. I'm active in the community. I'm in the fire brigade, the volunteer fire brigade. I am involved in community events like the Golden Shares, the Wings Over Wairarapa. I'm deeply connected to a number of community organisations and volunteer my time. But also, I speak with passion about this place. I think people understand how committed I am here and how desperate I am to see this place get the voice back that it once had, but it doesn't have currently. We can do so much here in Wairarapa. We've got a lot of potential, but what we need is a government that's going to invest in rural areas. That's why I'm asking for the Labour party vote for Labour. And we also need an MP that is loud and proud Wairarapa, will push this region and what's important to it at every single opportunity. And that's why I'm asking for the candidate vote. And so it doesn't actually matter if you do not vote for Labour. We ask that you do, but it doesn't matter who your electorate MP if you're not a Labour supporter. What it matters is that they are effective, not what their party is. So we're pushing hard for 2 ticks Labour, but I know the message is out there and people are coming to their own conclusions that even if they're not going to vote for Labour, they're going to give me their support here locally.
Cool. And anything you want... Oh, I just had one last question. We didn't really address this when we talked about water quality last time. Kieran, who in New Zealand owns the water?
Well, we all own the water, but it's about ensuring that the water is used in a manner that is in all of our interests, and that's why we want to have that conversation. Absolutely.
And your thoughts on bottling water in New Zealand water and sending it overseas?
Yep. So, like I said earlier, that we're proposing that there be a price on that. That it is wrong that New Zealand's fresh water is bottled at no cost here, and then making a huge profit predominantly overseas. We say that's wrong. So we want to impose a per litre price, probably around 10 cents, which is minimal, really, compared to what they are making on that fresh water. But what it means is that there will be money available for a fund so that we can actually start to bring our rivers back to a real swimmable standard once again.
Excellent. Any last thoughts?
2 ticks Labour.
2 ticks Labour?
Yeah.
Excellent. And so thank you so much for your time, Kieran.
Actually, if there is something just quickly.
Go for it.
If you're not enrolled, whoever you're going to vote for, if you're not enrolled, it's not too late. So there are early voting places available right throughout the electorate. And so all you need to do is go into an early voting place, and that allows you to enrol and vote at the same time. So it doesn't matter, actually, just get out and vote. Doesn't matter who you vote for, but make sure you take part. But you can't enrol and vote on election day. You have to do it early. So I think that's just a wee public service announcement to finish off the interview.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kieran. Thank you for your time.
It's been a pleasure.